Gold in Canada's north has made a lot of people rich. But in the city of Yellowknife, some are calling it a curse. That's because buried underneath an old gold mine, there is a toxic threat, a chemical byproduct of extracting all that gold that threatens the whole community. And as 16 by 9 learned, there are thousands of contaminated sites across the country, and taxpayers are on the hook for the cleanup, which will cost billions. What you're looking at is one of the most contaminated places in Canada. It's called Giant Mine, the gold mine that helped build the city of Yellowknife. While it was in operation, this mine produced nearly 200 tons of gold, making it one of the most productive gold mines in Canadian history. But extracting that gold created a deadly byproduct, a dust called arsenic trioxide.
There's 237,000 tons of arsenic trioxide stored underground. There's probably enough underground to kill every person on the planet a couple times over.
Few people know more about the story of Giant Mine than environmental advocate Kevin O'Reilly. That story goes all the way back to the 1940s.
Every day for the first 3 years, from 1948 to 1951, there was 7,400 kilograms of arsenic trioxide going up the stack. This is a proven human carcinogen.
How much was going up every day?
7,400 kilograms a day of a dust. So basically it would spread across a good part of Yellowknife. Most of the soils in the community now have been contaminated as a result of this gold roasting operation. It's left a horrible legacy in this community.
That community is also home to the Dene Yellowknives First Nation and former chief, Fred Sangris.
People died. Our community was in grief for many years. This community had 4 to 5 people who had cancer at the same time. It's not normal for a small community like this to have 4 to 5 people having cancer at the same time. Not normal.
Was the gold a curse?
Gold was a curse and it's still a curse today. I heard a lot about it when I was growing up. My grandfather's angry, my parents were angry. I'm angry. Before the gold mine here, this community was peaceful. People go out and get the fish here. People go to the water and get their water and get their medicine plants here. Everything we needed, it was all on the land.
That all changed in the 1930s. With the Klondike gold rush over in neighboring Yukon, prospectors began arriving in Dene territory and struck gold.
The Yellowknife Dene received nothing from that mine. Royalties, nothing. The arsenic started coming into the bay. They noticed the fish were floating upside down, and sometime in the springs, and people were picking up fish. And they thought the fish were dying naturally, and so they're giving it to their sled dogs. And next thing you know, the sled dogs are dying. We got shafted. They got the gold.
Government documents obtained by 16 by 9 show that in 1951, a Dene child in Yellowknife drank melted snow and died from arsenic trioxide poisoning. According to Fred, 2 more Dene children died of arsenic poisoning 8 years later.
The man who lost 2 children in 1959, the mine companies came and gave them $1,000 because he lost his children. Forget about it. You know, take the money. That's crime. Nobody had been charged for the death. No, there's no inquiry.
Records show the government knew about the danger the arsenic posed before the first child died. But no action was taken to reduce the pollution until months later. Its efforts to warn people of the danger were minimal. Ads were placed in the local paper, along with a few signs posted around waterways.
The government issued warnings, but who can read at that time?
You mean they were written?
They were written in English, but how many Dene people could read? Nobody could read it.
In 1951, the mine finally installed a filtration system to capture some of the toxic arsenic that was blanketing the town. But that created another problem.
Now, what are we going to do with this stuff? Well, the decision was made with some support or understanding with the government that the best way, at least they thought at the time, was to put this stuff back underground, capture it and pipe it underground.
So they've got all this toxic dust.
Yes.
It's called arsenic trioxide.
That's correct.
And they decided to pump it underground.
Yep.
Right call?
There was an engineer for the mine that said, you know what, this is not a good idea. But the decision was made. That was cheap, nasty. This is the way we can deal with this stuff.
There was no major investigation into how the arsenic was affecting people until 1966, when the federal government began a study. Even then, the results of that study were buried.
The chief medical health officer kept having local authorities bothering him and writing him and hounding him about, where's this report? When is it coming? And basically said, well, there's, not really a big problem here.
While the government tried to reassure people everything was fine and it wasn't hiding anything, this memo between Yellowknife and Ottawa tells a different story. It was apparently decided at the time that the report should not be made public because it might cause alarm on the arsenic question. Under pressure from the media and the community, the government did a larger arsenic study in 1977. It found elevated arsenic levels in hair samples taken from people in the community. Meanwhile, the pollution continued.
Even after the pollution control devices were put in place, there was still arsenic trioxide being released into the environment. The creek isn't even found in its natural course. It's been diverted, moved, shifted around. There's open pits. It's a mess.
Why isn't this on the headline of every newspaper in the country?
Well, hey, Yellowknife's the end of the road, out of sight, out of mind.
Even now, on windy days, locals say they can see clouds of arsenic dust wafting over Yellowknife Bay from the mine site.
It has happened, and it happened as recently as May of this year. And
This May?
That's right.
Am I breathing in arsenic right now?
Well, because you're in Yellowknife, most of the soil here is contaminated from the mining operations. You are getting exposed to some level of arsenic that's above what levels you'd expect in perhaps other parts of Canada, just because you're here.
The mine shut down in 2004, and the pollution finally stopped. What has never gone away is the 237,000 tons of arsenic trioxide still buried beneath the mine. How toxic is this dust?
An aspirin-sized dose, if you were to ingest it directly, would kill you.
An aspirin-sized pill of arsenic trioxide would kill you, and you have 237 tons of it underground?
237,000 tons of it stored underground.
That's unbelievable.
It's a huge mess, and we, quite frankly, really don't know what to do.
Next, a giant mess left behind by giant mine.
If I die of cancer, on my stone, you can write out, died from giant mine pollution.
Here in Yellowknife, they call it the very bad day. They actually call it that.
Yeah, they call it that.
The very bad day.
The very bad day.
Environmental advocate Kevin O'Reilly says that very bad day could happen if the creek here ever floods and carries highly toxic arsenic trioxide into the environment.
What happens if the creek somehow freezes up, backs up, jumps over its bank and gets into one of the pits? Well, if it gets into one of the pits, it's going to go into the underground and it's going to leach out this arsenic trioxide. Yellowknife is right next to Great Slave Lake. It's one of the largest freshwater bodies in Canada, if not the world. And This water flows where? Down the Mackenzie River, Canada's biggest river.
To prevent that worst-case scenario from ever happening, a team of government workers has to deal with all that arsenic trioxide stored underground.
So this is our roaster deconstruction project.
Jane Amphlett is the operations manager who took us to where it all started. It's called the roaster complex, where the rock was crushed, mixed with chemicals, and the gold was extracted. It's also where the deadly byproduct, arsenic trioxide dust, was made.
The roaster complex was the most contaminated structures we had on site. It's where the arsenic trioxide was actually created and where it was pumped underground.
The job of taking down these heavily contaminated buildings is painstaking work. It has to be done piece by piece with extreme caution.
But so there's no big boom, you're not imploding these buildings?
No, absolutely not. Not with a contaminated structure like that. It's really important to do it really carefully.
Amazingly, for much of the mine's history, employees worked in these highly contaminated areas with little protection. Not anymore.
I can't help but notice that your workers here are wearing hazardous material suits.
Beyond just arsenic, there's asbestos, there's various risks that we're constantly managing on site.
Despite those precautions, 31 workers here showed elevated arsenic levels last year. So far this year, 26 have shown elevated levels.
We have a medical monitoring program as well that measures arsenic for workers weekly. We want to investigate, make sure they're not getting exposed to any more additional arsenic than they need to be.
By the time it closed, Giant Mine had created about 16 million tons of waste spiked with arsenic. That's in addition to all the arsenic stored underground.
And what we're looking at here, this moonscape, these are tailings ponds.
Yeah, these are our tailings ponds. So tailings is kind of the waste that's generated during the mining process.
And that's Yellowknife, just behind us there.
Yeah.
Even the buildings here are so contaminated that once they're torn down, they have to be stored in secure shipping containers. After years of proposals and planning, the government decided the best way to keep the city safe was to leave the arsenic underground and freeze it in place.
This is what we call our active system. So it's a series of pipes all around the chamber, and we put in through the pipes a cold liquid to freeze the rock around the chamber and to create that block so that it's secure in there and no water can get in or out.
And this chamber of arsenic trioxide is right in the middle, underground there.
That's right. Yeah.
There are 14 chambers filled with arsenic dust at the site. The plan is to freeze the rock around each chamber. Once that happens, thermosiphons will be placed around the perimeter of each chamber to keep it that way.
And what the thermosiphons do is they take heat from the ground and they bring it up to the surface, so they circulate.
Heat out of the ground.
You're circulating the cold air down and the heat out.
So how much arsenic are we talking about here? How do you conceptualize that?
12-story buildings, that's the size of these chambers.
The cost to deal with the contamination is estimated at a staggering $900 million. It will take another $2 million a year to maintain the freezing system. And because the government never forced the companies that own the mine to take responsibility for the pollution, taxpayers will have to pay for all of it.
Corporations, they're only going to operate within the laws that exist, that governments are supposed to be putting in place. The company is not around anymore, so who's going to have to pay for trying to manage this stuff forever? You and I as taxpayers, that's who's going to have to pay for this.
I'm going to pay for the cleanup
That's
here?
correct, absolutely.
For how long?
Well, for how long? Forever. There's no way to get rid of this stuff.
I have a bill in perpetuity?
That's correct.
And the government hasn't always been forthcoming about that bill. Only 2 years ago, they claimed the remediation of Giant Mine was only going to cost $450 million, even though internal documents show they'd known for months the cost had doubled.
That's not just a miscalculation.
No. Like, this is doubling of the cost. So where does that figure come from? And it took them several weeks to come back and try to fumble around and respond in some way.
Kevin accuses the government of more foot dragging during an environmental assessment that took 6 years to finish.
I think those costs have only increased as a result of this environmental assessment.
How expensive could this get?
I wouldn't even want to hazard a guess now, but I think it's in the billions of dollars.
The Minister of Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development is responsible for Giant Mine and those skyrocketing costs. But the minister declined our request for an interview. Former Environment Commissioner Scott Vaughan says there are laws requiring companies to put up money ahead of time for environmental damage, but they often let polluters walk away without paying the full cost, meaning taxpayers are once again left with the bill.
If we know that there's not enough money for those financial safeguards, then we could be, facing the bill in the future as well.
And Giant Mine is far from the only problem. It's just one of more than 22,000 federally owned contaminated sites. Chances are there's one close to your home. The Environment Ministry oversees all of those sites and has decided many of them don't require any action at all. When Scott investigated, the government wouldn't tell him how those decisions were made.
If you don't look that hard, then you can just say, well, we don't think there's a problem, and you close it, and the cost then is zero.
Thousands of those contaminated sites were closed before soil and water samples were ever taken. Environment Minister Leona Agluka declined our request for an interview, but her staff told us they have historical data showing those sites aren't dangerous, and there's no need for site testing.
There is a worry that it was a paper exercise from somebody sitting in headquarters that didn't really have a good handle on what the actual risks were out in the real world.
In April, the Parliamentary Budget Officer estimated the bill to deal with contaminated sites has grown to $7 billion.
Canada did a really good job in hiding the greatest secret in the North.
After decades of pollution, years of cover-ups, and a legacy of mismanagement, former Chief Fred Sangris says it's too late for an apology. He wants an inquiry.
I'm afraid. Is this thing going to be safe? We don't know. If I die of cancer, on my stone, you can write out, died from giant mine pollution. You can write that on my stone. I have no problem putting that there. I have no problem putting Canada to shame. Because really, they're poisoning us slowly.